Even flies know what a larder is. But I want to dig a bit deeper into this automotive abyss. To start, I need to drag this rolling fridge away from the tree to a more spacious bit of the yard where I can spin it around on my shaft. Naturally, the wet grass and manure are making this task about as enjoyable as a root canal. Now, the yard isn't chock full of other larder masterpieces, it's just that my yard is basically dirt. After the rain, even walking feels like I'm wading through treacle. It's a real treat. And for those of you who've been following this channel for a while, you might recall that even towing an Oka uphill under these conditions is quite problematic. And yes, this hunk of junk is called an Oka. Don't confuse it with garden tools or anything remotely useful. I've no idea which part of Kalashnikov they were inspired by when naming this thing. For anyone still struggling to grasp the madness here, I need to mount the Oka onto the subframe of a Volga. Naturally, the Oka needs to be thoroughly dismantled first. Let's start with the active safety system. Next, the cabin, which appears to be made of recycled plastic bottles. Then again, maybe they weren't recycled. After contracting finger cancer from handling this abomination, the Oka needs to be flipped over, at least to reveal the incorrectly written website name. Time to amputate the Oka's hands and legs by unscrewing the front subframe and the axle pretending to be a rear suspension. I unscrewed the subframe so quickly that it caught fire. Pity it didn't go up in flames entirely. The throttle cable played the role of an umbilical cord at the birth of the subframe, which I, of course, forgot to unscrew. After draining the subframe's horse piss and barely avoiding it smashing the camera, we move on to the rear axle. This shaft might suit a boat trailer, but how much crocodile would one need to put this abomination in a car? It's worse than a live axle on springs, or heaven forbid, an axle with a Panhard rod. The stiffness and articulation of this monstrosity. Anyone care to enlighten me?
Какая жесткость и артикуляция у этой конструкции? Кто-нибудь подскажет?
Next, the Oka needs a panoramic floor. To achieve this, it had to be flipped over a few times. The floor, suspension, and firewall are all unnecessary, as everything should come from a Volga. From the body, we only need the shell. What's the point of all this? Amazingly, there is one. Since I can't afford to turbocharge the aubergine to increase its power, I've chosen a different path, reducing weight. Sure, one could weld two Volga subframes together and drive around, but for years now, I've been obsessed with the idea of crossbreeding a Volga and an Oka. In this bizarre automotive porn, the Oka is purely nominal and will serve only as the body. The body is knackered, so I won't weld the structure to it. It'll just be the hollow shell into which I fit the Volga. For now, only the wheels and engine will protrude from the Oka. I won't narrow the axle, and part of the engine will undoubtedly stick out from under the bonnet. And that's just fine by me. Additionally, I'll need a couple of front springs from the old V8 suspension. These will replace the leaf springs because the shackles and rear mounting of the springs won't fit into the Oka's body, they stick out too far behind the rear axle. Instead of the springs, I plan to install a single rod and weld a ball joint to the top of the bridge for an A-arm. I've seen something similar done with an EVA, using a ball joint from a V8. Brilliant, right? Why not use the Oka's steering joint? Because in our case, we've got a steering knuckle from a Sobel, which has mounts for the ball joint and the ball joint itself, which at least inspires some semblance of trust. Despite the apparent difference in track width between the Oka and the Volga, it doesn't seem too bad. At least the fenders made of Macroflex and underwear will do their job.
Своё дело сделают.
A few words about the engine. It should be a ZMZ 406. It's one of the highest revving Russian engines, and on a car like this, high revs are essential.
А на такой машине, как мне кажется, обороты нужны.
Plus, I already had this engine. It's been killed, but not to death. At least it wasn't completely dead a couple of years ago. It just has a loose piston in the fourth cylinder and scuffing in all four. But the cylinder head is polished. Before installing it, I'll need to start it up and ensure it can work somehow. After installation, I can finish it off with a clear conscience. I know this all sounds mad, but trust me, I have a plan. And I have a drawing. Thanks for supporting this lunacy.